Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to this panel about a fascinating but difficult topic, namely agricultural trade. My name is Cecilia Malmström. I'm a senior fellow, non-resident at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I am honored to share this panel today where we will talk about the important role that agriculture plays in providing livelihood for farmers and reducing food insecurity. At the same time, we have sustainability issues, climate change, creating challenges for crops and cattle. And we know that many people are still suffering from hunger. The agriculture sector is characterized with a lot of protectionism. And since the Agreement on Agriculture and Trade in 1995, we initiated reduction in subsidies and other trade barriers. There was some progress made in Nairobi, 2015, when it comes to export subsidies, prohibition, and some new rules for farm export support. But as you all know in this room, agri has not grown as trade in manufactured goods or services because the failure to fully integrate in the trading system in the WTO rooms. As years have passed by, we have failed to deliver a credible outcome. We've had committees, we had working groups, we have papers and non-papers and amendments and ministerials and declarations, etc. It is time for a new approach. We need to find a way forward that is fair, transparent, and sustainable. In order to maximize the world's resources and to achieve a fairer trade, we need to scale up. A stable, open, rule-based system that can guarantee food security and livelihoods. And in order to solve this little problem, we have an excellent panel here today to discuss how we can move forward and what we need to do for a total rethink. I have Mrs. Beth Berstall, who is Deputy Director General for FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization within the United Nations. We have Mr. Andrea Porro, who is Secretary General of the World Farmer Organization. We have Ino Manak, who is Fellow for Trade Policy at the Council of Foreign Relations in Washington, and Minister, Her Excellency, Diana Mondino, who is Minister of Foreign Affairs in Argentina. So you're all very welcome. We were supposed to have also Mr. Pradip C.S. Mita here, the Secretary General of CUTS International, which is a Consumer Unity and Trust Society, an Indian NGO. He had to cancel, unfortunately, at the very last moment for health reasons. So we know about the problems, but how do we move forward? I would like to ask the panel to outline a little bit where the main problems are and if there is a path towards reform, and then we will dig a little bit more into the details. And if we have time, I know there are many experts sitting in this room, we will also invite you to take questions. So, Minister Mondino, Argentina has taken a little bit of a new approach with the new government on reform. Could you tell us a little bit about this?
Thank you, Cecilia. Actually, the approach Argentina is taking is just one out of common sense. Let our producers produce, let our buyers buy at the lowest price. We are opening up the economy, we are trying to stop all the zigzagging that Argentina has had in the last decades, and we are trying to build not only trust as regards the rest of the world, but also internally, as that having a rules-based system within Argentina, not only with WTO. For that, we are trying to comply, or beginning the long process to comply with OECD. We have been members of WTO for many, many years, and we're trying to go into that rules-based system. Having said that, not the rules that we have had in the past, but new rules that take in consideration incentives for people to produce better and to consider all the options that we have. Many of the things that we've had and has stalled WTO come from maybe the confusion about different words that look similar or sound similar, but are very different. Sustainability, sovereignty, and security. They're all very different, and they entail very different things. We hope that we can enhance our production, agricultural and livestock production as much as possible, and help the rest of the world feed itself.
I'm sure we'll go into how we will do this and what the common sense looks like more in practice. Mr. Porro, you, as Secretary General of the World Farmers Organization, you followed the negotiations very closely for years, I presume. What's your take from a little bit outside the WTO? What's the main problem?
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for having us today here as voice of the farmer, as global voice of the farmer, with more than 80 farmer organizations, and some of them are in the audience today with us. Testimonial of how much we consider important the WTO and the negotiation. For us, the main take, and is what we have seen worldwide, is also the need of including farmer organizations, their representation at national level before coming at the global level to build consensus. There is nothing that will help to build a long-lasting effect if the end taker of the decision are involved at the beginning of the decision-making phase. And sometimes this is not occur, and is not only on trade. We have many examples in which the building of an inclusive approach that brings farmers and their representation especially at the table before a decision is taken, make the decision be more inclusive, more effective, and more applicable.
So is it your impression that farmers have not been included sufficiently in the negotiations in this House?
In not all the respective fora and panel, from national to regional to global level, they are not being engaged at the same level. It's not all the government have worked inclusively, and also because sometimes Minister of Trade, Minister of Agriculture, they need to consultate before. So creating space like this fora is important also to invite and have the national farmer organization to also understand the mechanism and then to reinforce to their respective government the need to be involved in the decision-making process, because farmers cannot be always at the end of the decision take elsewhere.
Interesting. Beth Bechtold, you are the Deputy Secretary General for the FAO. Of course, we talk about food, something that is hopefully on everybody's table, and some struggling to get it on table every day. What's your view? Why are we not moving forward?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here representing FAO. There's obviously, I think, a number of ways that our organization partners with the WTO and its members, very much focused around data analysis, market transparency, the encouragement that needs to go to national governments to keep markets open and to keep trade flowing. That's critically important to the overall situation of food insecurity that we're facing right now. But I'd like to sort of focus in this room, I think, on something that is creating very significant concern for our organization, and I'm sure is shared by my fellow panel members, which is in this particular moment of 2024, as we really look at the situation of the world, the increased issues and situations of conflict, the climate crisis, and the continuing effects of the economic downturns from COVID and even other just general fiscal and other economic disruptions in many regions of the world. All of this is pushing more and more people to very serious levels of food insecurity. And in fact, if we look at 2023, the year just concluded, 282 million people currently sit in what we consider the highest levels of acute food insecurity. We call it the IPC classification system, IPC levels 3, 4, and 5, which takes you basically from emergency to crisis to catastrophe and near famine. Why do I talk about this number? These are 282 million people in 59 countries around the world. The numbers are getting worse. They're not getting better. But the most important part for this room and for this panel is that we assume and think that at least 3/4 of the 282 million people are farmers. They're livestock herders, they're fishermen and women. They depend on agriculture for their livelihoods They depend on agriculture to support their families. They depend on agriculture to support their villages, their communities, their countries. So we have a population very much at risk, which puts trade flows at risk when we have this kind of situation in the global agricultural community. But the other side of that coin is that in many ways, keeping markets open, finding ways to keep trade flowing and to continue to support agricultural trade is also a very important solution for these affected populations. And so thinking about how does trade factor into the reduction of risk, being more proactive, thinking about better positioning of commodity flows, thinking about food security on that broader scale is something that I think is fundamentally important in how the conversations in this particular forum take place.
Thank you very much. Inu Manak, from a more academic perspective, of course, food is different than any other commodity and service in the world, but why is it so sensitive, and how come there are so many agricultural subsidies that are still stuck there for decades?
Thank you, Cecilia. And, food is so sensitive because it's a basic human need.
Of course.
And I think that's really what drives a lot of the emotion that we feel when we talk about food and when we negotiate rules around food. And if you look at the Agreement on Agriculture, I think it provides WTO members with quite a bit of flexibility when it comes to subsidizing the agricultural sectors. But there still remains a lot of frustration over what was negotiated many years ago. Now, when it was negotiated, I think that the Agreement on Agriculture tried to strike a balance between giving members enough space to address their domestic agricultural concerns, while at the same time providing a little bit of a nudge to say, you need to limit your trade distorting practices in this place. Now, if we look at the landscape of agricultural support measures and perhaps why there is so much frustration, what's really interesting is that there are very few entities that are able to provide large amounts of support. So if you look at the list of the countries that do support it, United States, China, the EU, Japan, India, which I think account for about 80% of all agriculture measures of support. And if we look at market price supports, the OECD estimates that there's a lot of variation in support by commodity and by country, so everyone has different interests in different places. But the effect of these price supports, if you look at the data from 2013 to 2016, raised domestic prices by 13% above the international market price. That has real-world consequences for people, and people feel that. So I think that's why it becomes also so emotional. But what's interesting about this is that while few countries can offer significant support, support does have some positive effects, can improve productivity, encourage research and development, but it also can increase inefficiencies to create new ones or amplify old ones. And I think that's where also there's a lot of debate. If you look at the overall trend of market support, I think that it has been trending generally in the right direction. We're seeing more stuff move into the green box, but I think there's a lot of debate about what's being put in the green box, and we can get into that. But what I have to say is that when you look at that decrease, it doesn't mean that there's no longer a problem. Just because we're seeing some numbers go down doesn't mean that those areas in which we still hold trade distorting practices, that that's not having a large impact. And so if we look at the subsidies that were in effect from 2020 to 2022, for example, there is a spike that happens there. In fact, agricultural subsidies hit a historic high at that time, a 2.5-fold increase from 20 years prior, which is quite significant. And now we have market supports of over $850 billion a year during that time period. So that's a lot. And this matters because I think that if we look at the research that's out there, we know that agricultural subsidies are far more distortive than tariffs. So it's a problem we have to solve, but one that obviously does not afford really easy solutions right off the bat.
Okay, we're starting to identify the problem. And in addition to well-known problems for decades, we have, of course, the increased number of people who live in poverty, as you said, with conflicts and wars all over the world. I think there are more conflicts and wars today than in 60 years or something, which is of course affecting also the daily life of the most vulnerable ones. And then we have the climate challenge, which is not only a climate challenge to all of us, it is also farmers who are the most affected by floods and droughts and so on. So how do we start moving forward on this? Can you develop a little bit from your initial comments, Diana?
Well, actually, climate issues are one of the main ways to start moving the conversation. I heard the previous panel that was between evolution and revolution. If we have to look into a problem that is so big, and without discussing whether there are or there are not climate issues, etc., what are the solutions? And the world is going into a system that's going to be very expensive, trying to have less energy or the usual sources of energy, which will impoverish people. It will make it more expensive to millions of people, while we have much better opportunities. Argentina, for example, and may I say Uruguay or Paraguay or some African countries, we offer a different solution, much faster, much cheaper, much more effective. If you believe in photosynthesis as the way of carbon capture, so that not only we will not be discussing whether a country, particularly a poor country, should be using less carbon, because among all poor countries we have such a tiny fraction of the total carbon usage. But actually we can become not only carbon neutral, but we can become, at least in my country, we can become carbon negative, so that we absorb more carbon through photosynthesis, rather than planting woods or rather than protecting forests that we all love. But allow us to use pastures, allow us to get another resource, use land that is unproductive right now through pastures that can be fed to livestock, and it can not necessarily be cattle, it can be chicken, it can be cows, lambs, goats, whatever. So that is a solution for climate that is much better than not using hydrocarbon, or we can compensate both of us. And that takes us into the system of whether a subsidy is helping or not. Because by subsidizing very expensive production processes that are there in Europe or other places, while countries that have a much cheaper and more effective and carbon reduction processes like Argentina has, that makes no sense from my perspective. We need to have at least a fair ground, a playground that where we can all be there, but considering a much bigger, from many perspectives, a much bigger problem. Why not use the cheapest solution while at the same time fostering food production? Again, going against other energy sources or using other kind of minerals, etc., more than welcome. But consider the possibility of using food production as a system. A strained system is not going to work, but a natural system is going to work through feeding pastures. And it's going to be far more effective than planting a wood or protecting existing woods. Photosynthesis is the solution. We all know, we studied in the primary school.
And what kind of international decisions would require that, or what is hindering you today?
Less subsidies.
Less subsidies.
Oh, sorry, rather than less subsidies, open markets. Open markets for every producer country that can open markets with the quality that's necessary, with all the care that are rules that have to be complied with, but open markets. Take away tariffs.
I see you nodding there, Beth. Would you like to fill in?
Yeah, I think a few things, a few forces maybe are at work that I'd like to elaborate on that I think validate that point of the priority of keeping markets open. As we all, I think, know the numbers about the increasing population growth that's coming still in Africa, in Southeast Asia, if we really look at what's necessary to achieve the targets that have been set out by the Sustainable Development Goals for us, as FAO, we care a lot about SDG 2, zero hunger, and if we want to really make a dent in ending hunger, food production has to essentially increase by 70+% by 2050. 2030 is right on top of us as it relates to the SDG agenda, and 2050 is not far from that either. And in the space of that, while we have to meet the demands of this growing population, we mentioned mentioned the importance of ensuring that we protect our environmental footprint. And this is the difficult space for agriculture today. Because on one hand, agriculture is expected to assure that we all collectively eliminate hunger, work to eliminate poverty, but the pressure that's coming from the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold tied to the climate crisis, so many are looking to agriculture as a part of the problem, the greenhouse gas emissions, the other contributions, and so there are so many different aspects of the agricultural sector that are essentially for national governments, for farming organizations that are the levers of how we work to control that. So some of that may come in the crops area. We might be able to identify and develop more innovation that brings drought-resistant seeds. In livestock, we have to think about further innovations, further utilization of whether it's genetics or better feed utilization. There will be some national governments that will decide that protein consumption may need to have modified guidelines in terms of a balance. But then there's water, there's forestry, there's aquaculture, and for each and every national government and national sector, these are very emotional and very protected oftentimes. They're economically viable, they're important, they're valuable, there are people's lives who are a part of these. And so one maybe idea that I might throw out here in the room for consideration, we are very focused on food loss and waste. As an opportunity for really trying to drive better security, better approaches, better practices. Fully 1/3 of what is produced is either lost or wasted in terms of food production worldwide. And when you think about, you've got to look at small wins, policy wins, where we can find agreement, where there are the fewest possible trade-offs. Because oftentimes when we make a decision in one sector, it's often going to have negative implications or be of concern for another sector or another constituency. And so I think collectively, as we think about solutions for agriculture, we need to find these spaces of common ground. And I think this may be one of those areas to really think about the importance of how we do better in terms of supply chain, how we do better in terms of logistics. And that is something that I know many people in this room are focused on when it comes to our trade channels.
How does that sound, Andrea? You are, of course, representing a lot of national organizations, and every country have their specificity, so there's not one view on that. But you said farmers have the feeling that they're not listened to enough in these negotiations, and of course they are there with the work. They need to be listened at. How does this sound? What would the response from your member associations be?
Thank you very much. I mean, there are a few points that I want to take and draw from the very inspiring words that we have for now. There is a challenge of a lot of farmers that produce food and go to bed hungry every day. And that somehow already says that there is something not functioning. But first I want to come with a message from our members. So our members, when in the lead up and during MC13, they asked us, WFO, through a policy that we have internally voted as a consensus building mechanism, to reiterate their commitment to support this process to achieve multilateral improvement in the global trading system. And they strongly push WFO in the engagement with WTO to remember that we want that farmers advocate for a pragmatic approach on unlawful protectionist measures and non-tariff barriers. Trade distorting domestic support that affect negatively other markets, but also a healthy and functioning dispute resolution mechanism, but also investment on capacity building. This starts as let's say, the good part of it. But there is something that is still that need to be said. We all remember the high fluctuation of price of agricultural input and product in the recent years that affected mostly farmers, limiting the possibility to unload the extra cost in their products and already working on very tight margin. Farmers, and especially family farmers that are with us in the journey of the World Farm Organization, are facing firsthand the consequences of political turmoil, financial speculation, value chain disruption, compounded by the effect of climate change and natural disaster. They feel that they are at the node of a network of taking a lot of responsibility for transformation and very little support to do so. trade and WTO can play an important role in this, also showing that farmers can be not only steward of biodiversity, steward of environment, that's all fantastic, but they are economic actors and they should be recognized as such.
May I add something there?
Of course.
If you were to visit the International Labour Organization, no one would dream.
They were here before.
Exactly.
This building.
You wouldn't dream of leaving labor out of the discussion. You have to have unions, you have to have the private sector, the production companies, and you have to have the governments. Here, we're leaving farmers behind. And sometimes we are claiming, or these kind of fora, they are claiming that they are protecting the consumer, and they're not, because they're charging a lot of taxes so as to subsidize someone who's going to bed hungry. It doesn't make any sense. So it's the way it has been organized needs to change. We have to consider all these people are paying for something that they do not get. That is something that will change sooner or later. And so farmers, are, since they are the ones who are producing, are the ones that should have starting on saying what can or cannot work.
Mm. You know, you heard...
I charge him for this comment. Okay.
Yeah, we'll deal with that afterwards, in the little black room behind. You know, you heard Andrea saying what farmers would like. That sounds rather good, no? Why aren't we there? And what can we do to get there when it comes to the subsidy issue?
Well, I think there's challenges here. You know, so we can say, yeah, farmers need more support, right? That all sounds good. I don't think anyone's going to object to that on principle.
But they also said that they want less trade distorting measures.
And
right?
less trade distorting measures. So again, how do you strike that balance? It's not easy to do. It's very easy to say, we'll just give you more money, or we'll give you more price supports, we'll do this. But that in itself creates the distortions. So I think we have to think about this issue in a very different way. You know, the trade landscape in agriculture has changed. Right? We can't be thinking about this in terms of what we discussed 30 years ago. We have to think about what is the sustainable agricultural market we want for the next 30 years. And I think part of that means we need to let go of this grip on subsidies as always the solution, and more subsidies being the solution, because subsidies are so distorted. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing even today with the growth of subsidies in the industrial sector is the fact that this creates lots of geopolitical tension. It creates problems of being able to solve issues that are global challenges. And ag is a global challenge. It's not just about my farmers or your farmers. We are in a global market where what we produce in one place has an impact on the entire planet. Right? So it's not just what we eat, but it's like our future completely, in the sustainable future. So I think, you know, it's always nice to hear about more support, but I want to figure out what it is. How can we target it so that it actually is not trade distortive? How do we make it so that even the poorest get access to it? Because if you look at subsidies today, the ones that do get it are usually the largest producers. Right? So in the markets that are massively subsidized, you're getting not the family farmers that maybe get the right support, but there's not that many in some of these places either, right? I'm talking about the United States in particular. We have big industrial farms. So I think we need to talk about precisely what those types of supports should be and how we can get there working together and not just on a national basis each time.
We've been talking about these things for, like you said, three decades. And of course, we know that it is very complicated. It is about public stock taking, it's about export control, it's about special safeguard mechanism, it's about a lot of lack of transparency as well, which is making it very difficult to have an overview of what is actually happening, like with many subsidies. But let's stick to agricultural subsidies. And then we have cotton and a lot of other issues. So do we need to start from scratch and saying that, yes, the problems are still there, but it has changed so much, the landscape today with climate change and with the food insecurity being so tangible today for so many people. You mentioned 282 million people who are struggling to get food on their table every day. That's a lot of people. Now there's nobody here who has been very long in the negotiations, but do we need a total new mandate? Or do we need to sort of break down the negotiations to try to see, okay, here we can make some progress, and then we'll deal with this a little bit later, and this we'll see. Because so far it's been this, we need to solve everything at the same time, and that's why MC ministerial conferences have failed year after year after year. So would you recommend a total rewriting of the mandate, or let's see what we have and let's try to collect the low-hanging fruits? Who want to jump in? Ino.
Sure, I can start.
You're in a comfortable position because you don't have to sit and negotiate it.
I guess, yeah. So since I'm not at the table, I have no skin in this game. But I don't think we have to throw everything out. But at the same time, we have to be really pragmatic about this. I understand everyone has specific positions that they don't want to let go of. And that's just, I think, the nature of trade negotiations writ large, right? But we also have to see, where can we find commonality? Where can we build consensus? And work on those areas. We don't have to try to solve it all at once, because it's not possible to solve it all at once anyways, right? So I think we should find those areas where we can move now, and then use that to build momentum to keep moving on every other issue that's been at a complete loggerheads, right? So I feel like there's a chance, an opportunity here, especially for the next MC, to say, we care deeply about agriculture, so let's just take on the issues that we can and then keep working at it. And I think everyone's been working very hard, and I think the negotiators have had many great ideas. I've seen fantastic proposals. So maybe we just need to cool the temperature a bit and then think to ourselves, what can we achieve today, and then what can we do tomorrow? That's it.
And the next ministerial will actually be in Africa, in Cameroon. Do you think this could be an advantage, that African countries and others come together and try to...
Definitely.
I mean, it's happening now, of course, as we talk. There are lots of work being done by negotiators and the different working groups. But can this push negotiators a little bit extra to deliver something?
If geography were to help, let's move everything into Africa. But look, over here, there's every single nationality represented here, and we have to move forward. You mentioned that there may be something that is low-hanging fruit. I don't know. If there is, why not use it? And I fully agree that we have to change things. But sometimes changing the language makes it easier. Why not call it renewable resources? If you're talking about food, actually, it's very emotional, as you mentioned. But this is something that happens every single year. And we have weather problems, and we have price issues, and we have all those. But if we consider that people need to be able to produce as much as possible, hopefully make some money on the way, it is going to help. The discussions at WTO have been stalling for, as you mentioned, a long time. And doing it partially would probably help. I mean, if you want to run a marathon, some people like me would start buying new shoes, even if I would never go to the gym. But at least you have to go to the gym and do a diet. Otherwise, even if you have good shoes, you will never run a marathon. So if the low-hanging fruit is getting shoes, okay, let's do it. But we have to start working, going to the gym, getting a diet, and then eventually we will run the marathon. Hoping for everybody to agree on everything. Come on, everybody has divorced at least once in their lifetime.
I'm not sure the statistics. We'll come back to that in next panel. So what would you start with? You buy the shoes, and then what would be the low-hanging fruit in the agri-negotiations?
Well, I'm very biased because of the Argentine experience, but we have markets that are closed, we have subsidies from our competitors and eventually our buyers, and we tax our own producers. So we have to start our own problem, tackling our own incredible taxes on our exporters. We have to do that. But at the same time, please open the market. Please buy from us. Let Africa buy from whoever they want. Because there are subsidies somewhere else, some people cannot produce at a relevant price because it comes with either with subsidies or better infrastructure. So a little bit more even ground would help. Again, we have our own sins to atone.
Yes, and of course the conditions are very different in different countries.
Of course.
Andrea, where should we start? Where is the low-hanging fruit?
I will repeat myself. Let's start from farmers, and let's start from their representation. Again, economic actor working with natural capital every day, they will value being concrete over anything else. And I think that predictability and stability are the two main issues that they will put together all the different farmers of the world, especially family farmers. But I would like to also to add a point that is probably not our low-hanging fruit, but a lot of time in this debate around agriculture, we always take the starting and the end of the chain, farmers and consumer. In between, there is also an industry and various objects that compose the value chain. A part in which farmers, they sometimes feel that they have low bargaining power, especially vis-à-vis the industry. And again, talking about tight margin that they're already facing with instability, that's the perfect recipe for a storm. So predictability and stability is definitely what farmers will see above anything else. And being involved and being asked on what do you think you need to unlock your potential. That's for me is the low-hanging fruit. Obviously, it's probably more easy said than done. But we work as WFO on the consensus building. We put together 88 national farmer organizations, and they managed to find a consensus on a trade policy with inspiring principle and few points that I laid out before. It takes hard work, and it takes the willing to work on the similarities rather than the differences, and the fact that again, repeating myself, stability and predictability of the market is something that definitely can unlock the power and the possibility of farmers to grow, so from strive to thrive.
Yes?
I need to probably be a little careful, just so I make it abundantly clear that perhaps this comment is not necessarily representative of FAO, but is a part of my own.
This is a closed room.
A part of my own personal background.
Streamed as well.
25 or more years ago, I was a staffer on the U.S. Senate Agriculture Committee, working on the development of U.S. farm bills. And I remember very clearly an experience where, for any of you who've been a staff member to a principal, you are often given the constituency letters to write the boilerplate responses. Thank you very much, so-and-so, for writing to us on this very important issue. And 25 years ago, the template language that we were sending back to partners was, we assure you that our highest priority is an affordable, safe, and abundant food supply. Those three words, and abundant was oftentimes the primary driver. So my point there being, 25 years ago, what was talked about was production, production, and more production. Dating even further back, at least in the US experience, there were slogans of plant fence row to fence row. Get as many acres out of every possible, farm as you possibly could. And today, my point being the evolution. So not a starting over again, but seeing progress in many ways. Today, you've got a U.S. agricultural system that is focused on being a food system. And that's a place where, from a UN perspective, this focus on food systems, this systems approach of how climate, how conservation, how research and development, how insurance and risk management all start to intersect. Now, do we have the right balance and the right complementarity across sort of national support systems of any type? Certainly not yet. We still have these issues. But I can say I do believe that there has been a trend at which agriculture and the farmers who are a part of these decisions and are the recipients are oftentimes advocating for very different styles of support, are looking to be in a position where they can contribute more to natural resource protection, where they can diversify their operations, where they can focus on more healthy and nutritious value-added production opportunities, market opportunities. And so I do think that there is a trajectory here that we should not lose sight of. But this systems approach, and all of us, I think, sort of using the same vernacular, thinking about agri-food systems transformation and how we put, I think, think a number of these different solutions in place is something that more of us need to use the same narrative. We need to be focused on these as being new priorities because of the situation that we described at the beginning about, frankly, the state of the world is very different than it was 25 years ago. The economics are different, the climate situation is different, global security is different, and there is such a sense of urgency right now that I think this is perhaps a moment to really try to bring some more integrated solutions to these approaches to how we support agriculture.
But is there a political understanding of this urgency? Because we have hundreds of millions of people starving. We have the food security issue. We have a trade market that is not functioning. And we have an acute climate challenge. Is the sense of urgency really there among politicians? You meet them, of course, when you negotiate, you meet ambassadors in FAO. Do you get the feeling that there is this sensation of urgency? We can't talk for 30 more years.
I think there's a recognition that there's a sense of urgency. I think the question that we really need to ask ourselves is, so then what are we willing to do to address it? What are we willing to invest in to repair it? What are we willing, and this is right now the challenge. There's the recognition, but I think we're finding, from our side at least, in too many of our member countries, the politics of the day are frankly becoming about a more inward looking approach, less about the global community and more about our own or their own national interests. The political dynamics in many are skewing in a particular direction that is not always about finding the global compromises to many of these things. I think there's the recognition, but I think some of us just need to push harder on the approaches, the solutions, the compromises, and really draw attention to whether they're not coming from agricultural backgrounds or they come from different points of view. This is the moment, and for us, we're trying very clearly, I think, along with the farmers' organizations and groups and others, to say you've got a real opportunity for agriculture to finally be a part of that solution. And I think that narrative, it sounds, I think many of us have repeated it for so long. I think people who are a part of farming are tired of sometimes feeling quite vilified. And I think that's a true sentiment. I come from a 7-generation family farm in the Midwest of the U.S., and I know my family. I know the feelings, the emotions of my father, my grandfather, the contributions to a community, and yet oftentimes a feeling of being sort of unheard or left behind or looked to as being a part of a problem, when in fact there are so many of the investments in innovation and technology and new solutions. And agriculture, farmers are trying to be better. Farmers are trying to contribute. Farmers know what their role in this world are, and I think we just have to, some of us, be, I think, even better and bigger spokespersons for them.
What's your view, Diana? Is there enough political will and awareness of the acuteness of the situation?
None.
None. Okay, thank you.
I can elaborate, but
Yes, please.
no, actually there's a lot of misunderstanding, as she was mentioning. There's not understanding what it means. You have more voters that are city dwellers than farmers.
But they also eat.
They also eat, and then you force farmers to sell at a low price so that they can eat and they can keep on voting for whoever is putting these restrictions. And there's also this discussion about as you mentioned, innovation, knowledge, agreement, that they think it's, I don't know, if you're going to have a yogurt, you believe it's a beautiful lady with an apron that's kneeling close to a cow that gets the milk to them. And that is something that we need to change, the perspective of how it goes. You have very poor families in Africa that may have 2 or 3, 5 cows. You may have huge operations in the rest of the world, but neither is there to lose money. They're all there to make some money, and they are there to have some flexibility. One thing that's definitely not understood correctly, at least by politicians, is that the farmer needs to take care of its land. They're the best stewards of their land. They have been producing 7 generations probably in the same place. They have been taking care of it. We do not need more impositions. We do not need more restrictions because they know how to take care of it, because otherwise they're destroying their capital. So that's something that's crucial. Farmers take care of the land much better than any regulation. Having taken that into consideration, they want to produce and make more money. And consumers would rather pay more. An option is, rather than pay subsidies that are done through tax collection, why not eliminate subsidies, eliminate taxes, people will have more money, and produce. That will take a lot of time, as Ina was saying. And there's a lot of sectors that need to compensate, and we can. But within maybe a few years, it can be done. But you have to understand that we are talking to the people that want to protect what they are doing, they want to make money, and they also want to express to the rest of the world that they know what they're doing, that they can do it better. Again, you can pay me later.
Inu, if you were to buy those shoes to run, the low-hanging fruits, where would you start? You alluded to a few ways forward.
Yeah, I think that there are many ways that we can start the conversation in a productive fashion, and perhaps it's going back to something Beth mentioned about climate, and how climate has become an integral part of how we think about agricultural trade today. The landscape has really changed, and our priorities have also changed as well, right? What we're trying to focus on in this landscape. Now, and she knows more about this than I do, because the FAO has started this program on climate smart agriculture. I think if you don't know about it, you should read about it, and I'm sure they have lots of materials on their site. I think it's important that we focus on this issue because agriculture does contribute a lot to greenhouse gas emissions, but there are other ways that we can improve this, and we can do this through improving productivity, investments in lots of land conservation, retooling some resources. There's a lot that we can do here, but also in terms of thinking about how we repurpose existing subsidies to support climate smart agriculture. And this is something that we can say that can incentivize maybe members to think more creatively about existing subsidies disciplines and say, how do we take the bad stuff that is doing harm and transform it into something that can be a positive force for good, not just in the trading system, but helping individual farmers who do know a lot more than maybe even some trade negotiator sitting in the room about what's actually good for their land, their crops, and for their entire ecosystem. So I think it's a multi-step conversation we need to have, but I think the opening of the importance of climate to agriculture is where we have to really begin.
Andrea, during this spring in Europe, but also in India, in Japan, in many places of the world, I think in Mexico as well, there were big demonstrations of farmers. In the European Union, some of it was related to the upcoming European Parliament election and discussions on what role farming and agriculture has to play in the green transition and so on, but also a frustration and mixed with the anti-trade sentiments and a lot of things played in there. You said we need to listen to the farmers, and I can understand sometimes that frustration manifests itself on the street as well, even if, as you said, those are just a little part of all the agriculturists who are not there. How can we get public support and trust among the farming community of what needs to be done with the reformation of the system, but also the greening of also the agricultural system?
Thanks. Yes, I had the opportunity to join a very interesting discussion around this issue at a webinar hosted by WTO earlier this year. Back then, the focus was very much on the protests in UE, as you stated, but obviously, in the meantime, we saw farmers protesting in India and more recently in Australia, just to mention two countries where we have active members. During the scene setting, and that was very interesting, farmers were described as upset about the size of the ask that is being made to them. In my point, and drawing from the experience of our members, the point was really that I objected the framing and argued that farmers are not upset about the size of the ask as much as about the type and the modality of the ask, so the request. As I mentioned, farmers are often small and medium entrepreneurs. We work with tight margin. On top of that, farms are complex biological systems that they do not fit into many models, and definitely leave aside electoral cycles. As farmers try to deal with top-down regulation and distorted market incentives, how do you think that the farmers feel? That is where farmers feel at the receiving end of decision taken elsewhere. Decision about agriculture taken without involving the people who will be most impacted by this action. And it's not my thing that we actually move towards the climate component of the discussion, because in the climate incentives and the climate request, it sits the complication of not having involved farmers in designing measures that fits the one that can be a positive actor of transformation. As I quoted, and I quote myself, which sounds a bit weird, but farmers, if you are in the red, you cannot go green. And that is one of the key issues. If your margins are tight, and then you have high price volatility of input and reduced price of products, then all the transformation that are asked without proper incentives, they seem an insurmountable rock in front of farmers, and they feel that they are left alone to bear all the responsibility of a food system that they need to be more, let's call it, agriculture smart or climate friendly or climate smart. You can name it, but the point is on this. So we think that we should really make sure that the farmer get the farmer support, apologies, in identifying, design the reform that concern about their sector. As has been said, they know best, but they should not be left alone, and they should not be alone in this discussion, obviously.
Yes, please.
I'd really like to come in on some of these points. You know, I'm not sure when it sort of ended, but somewhere in around the maybe 50s or 60s, what probably was once a unwritten social contract, say, between farmers and consumers started to disappear. So in that period, at least, there was really an understanding from consumers that the food that was being produced for them was, again, it was safe, it was of highest quality. There was an acceptance by consumers of what their food supply, the food that was produced for them was. Today, in 2024, we've talked about a lot of the other dynamics, but let's talk about the consumer dynamic. We all want, certainly, the most modern IT-driven device in our briefcases and, you know, at our desktops. But when it comes to innovation and technology in the food system, that has clearly started to create tensions in terms of consumer attitudes. We've had socioeconomic changes where consumers are now looking for, and you hear about this, they want non-GMO, they want natural, they want free range, they want vegan, they want, you know, and the list goes on and on and on. And so in some parts of agriculture, we're finding ourselves with this very tense dynamic between the farmer and the customer. And I think that we probably are in a place where we won't ever go back to having that social contract in the way that it was structured before, but we somehow have to find a new middle ground. And for me, sitting here, seeing the Director General right here in front of me, and thinking also about an organization like FAO, I think places like the WTO, places like the Food and Agriculture Organization, are actually venues and gatherings where the difficult, contentious, and complicated topics have to be debated. It's not easy in an FAO governing body meeting to debate the future of biotechnology, gene editing, plant-based or lab-based meat production, the future of livestock production generally. These are controversial, contentious. They're not just about governments. They're about consumers as well, who have very strong. They're about a regulatory community that has a big stake in this. But I guess what my point being is maybe those things, we won't ever find the solution completely to resolve them, but I think it speaks to the value of the World Trade Organization and the value of a food and agriculture organization, because if not us, if not venues and forum like this, then where do we make the progress? Otherwise, we put our heads in the sand, markets get disrupted, trading patterns are disrupted, and we have, a very differentiated and very fragmented approach to agriculture. And I think for some of us, we need to be the convening bodies, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how slow the progress may seem, or how difficult it is to get to resolution. I know for us, we see that very much as really one of our key roles and functions for our members who really care about the future of agricultural production.
Certainly, and a global forum like this is an excellent place to have that conversation. Now, some of these things are happening so quickly, so we cannot really find a negotiated agreement on it, but it's certainly useful to have the discussion. But if we come back a little bit to the WTO and the need for a fairer, more transparent, more open agricultural trade, which is what we talk about. If you would send a message to the negotiators in light of the Cameroon conference next year, in 2 years, what would that be, Minister?
Carrots and sticks.
Carrots and sticks?
Sorry, incentives, that's a nice word of saying it, and restrictions.
Yeah, carrots and sticks is translated as
Okay.
well. Yeah?
And that you have to allow people to produce more, and if you don't comply with certain rules that have to be very carefully defined, well, then you're in trouble. But everything that she was mentioning right now makes perfect sense. You have to start having a different kind of conversation, parcel the discussion as we mentioned, maybe the solution, I don't know. But we cannot have one solution fits all. But again, if you look at renewable resources, food is one thing. Is cotton different? Or from corn, when you get ethanol, or you get the bubbles in your Coke come from corn. So is that different? Can we put it all together? And that is something that we have to take consideration. So if you have the right kind of incentives, it works. And the best incentive, the books say, it's markets, open markets. Let us buy and sell, let consumers buy and choose, and probably it may work. The other thing is putting restrictions, how much CO2 can be there, etc., may be necessary according to some people, but the problem is let people produce, and that is not happening.
If I had a message to negotiators, I would say, think about the future, not necessarily what's going on today in terms of how you feel about all these issues and all the decades that have built up on specific things that we still can't seem to get over. Part of this also reminds me of the book talk I did earlier today with Dmitry Gozubinsky on why politicians lie about trade. And I have to say, yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I hope a lot of people made it out to that. But it's not just about what policymakers say and what they lie about. It's what they don't say. And I think we have to remember this when we get into the negotiating rooms as well. And then when we go back home and sell what it is that we agreed to. Because if we look at examples of countries that undertook difficult agricultural reforms, they did come out on top in the end. Take a look at New Zealand, which in the 80s drastically cut support for its agricultural sector. There was a lot of fear that this would lead to complete catastrophe. Farmers would leave the sector. Only 1% left. And I think that's pretty impressive because what we look at and see New Zealand today, I mean, I see New Zealand exports everywhere in the supermarket. They've managed to thrive. And that's an important lesson for us. So the reality is, I think policymakers, and I think this gets to what you were saying as well, Diana, that there are trade-offs. And we have to be honest about what those trade-offs are, explain to folks what it is we must give up to get something much better in the future. So I think for negotiators, let's think about the future.
Thank you. I know that there are lots of negotiators here in the room, and sometimes when I've been to negotiating forums when agriculture is involved, the conversation is slightly more emotional than this one. So if, yes, please. If you want to intervene, we have some minutes for questions.
Okay.
Not long interventions, snappy and short.
Thank you. Ali Renison, I used to be an advisor to the UK Trade Minister. I could spend the whole time talking about fertilizer, but for me it's a really interesting microcosm of a bigger issue, which is, we saw in the last couple of years that the amount of challenges for access for fertilizer in developing countries became a huge issue for food production. So do we start looking and saying, do we have a more sort of tailored approach for developing countries to use more fertilizer if we have these restrictions, many of which are not notified to the WTO? I know the WTO and the FAO have done a great mapping job in that space. Or do we say, well, actually, the problem there is that contributes to climate change, so we should be looking at more sort of genetically sort of edited, drought-resistant crops? Can we find a way that actually tackles those tensions?
Great question. Do we have anybody else who? Yes, please, Belen.
Hello.
Take note and
Very nice to get the chance to talk to you all. Great conversation. My name is Belen Gracia. I used to be a trade negotiator for Argentina and a PhD candidate at Maastricht University. My question is for Minister Mondino. I was in a panel just this morning where Marie Pankesto was suggesting that since we don't have big powers anymore in the WTO, it's time for middle powers. And I was wondering, what is the role that you foresee for Latin American countries and African countries in these discussions in the WTO? And where do you think we should start moving the needle for these discussions on agriculture to actually advance? Thank you.
The gentleman there, yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Preetam Banerjee from Center for WTO Studies. Madam, you mentioned the farm protests that have happened over the summer. One thing is common for all of them. The farmers were pretty much saying that don't leave us at the mercy of the markets. And if we go by what seems to be the consensus of this August panel, that farmers know best, then shouldn't we take some lessons from what the farmers were protesting about? Because it seems to be saying that markets are volatile, they have issues of climate change, etc., and they have need for support, genuine support, as do consumers in developing countries, because there is genuine issues of food security and hunger in these places. So, what is the response of the panel to these challenges? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final one there, yes, madam, and then we'll have a last round.
Thank you very much. My name is Hildegunn Gjengedal, and I represent the Norwegian Farmers Union, and we are also members of the WFO. And to the statements of Andrea, I think that you didn't hear the last part of the sentence about internal support, because it was that we want to take down internal support that is actually devastating other markets or negatively affecting other markets. So I think that so many farmers around the world, also small farmers, family farmers in the north and the south, are dependent on support and tariffs to be able to produce at all. And that's why we find these compromises between the farmers from different parts of the world, that we have to have trading rules that makes it possible to produce, also in areas where we're not competitive on the world market. And we need to do that to be able to produce 70% more. And I wonder how you are looking into this, because it is necessary with some support and some tariffs for also for small farmers to be able to survive.
Thank you very much. You heard the questions. Some were directed directly to you, Minister, but you don't have to answer all of them, all of you. But please, with a finalizing round, why don't you start, Beth? And then, unfortunately, I'm sorry, but we have to wind up.
I'll be very short, and I think I'll touch on the topic around fertilizer, perhaps. which obviously gained global attention, especially when the war in Ukraine broke out, given that region's predominance and domination in both grain production, but also agricultural input and energy production as well. I think when it comes to the issue of fertilizers, especially as we think about the future of Africa, there's oftentimes a focus on just how low the productivity and fertilizer application or availability rates are in Africa, and the natural reaction from many is, well, we need to make that number go up. Africa needs more fertilizer. And I think to the point that Inu made about thinking about the future, this is a really important moment in time to actually think about whether or not the issue is one of quantity of fertilizer, or whether it's about precision of how and where fertilizers are used. And this is where innovation and technology comes fully into play, with both the advent of what many call precision-oriented agriculture. The most basic of tools right now in Africa, it's something that FAO is working on with a few of our donors, is soil mapping, simply digitizing and doing digital work to understand the different soil layers, soil strata, soil varieties, so that when fertilizer needs to be applied, or those crop inputs need to be applied, there is a clear understanding that it is not a one-size-fits-all, just layer every ton of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that you can over the fields and try to, think that that will deliver a very productive crop. So these types of tools are really important right now in this moment, along with, I think, again, the focus on the future. There is a significant amount of potential, I think, in the future of biostimulants, bio-based fertilizers and bio-based inputs that also, I think, changes the type of narrative and the approach that we can bring to not only bringing productivity up, but also to the climate-smart, nature-based, more natural-focused solutions. There's going to be a middle ground there, and we're not that many years away from having that, and I hope that many of us advocate to make sure that Africa is on the front lines of being a part of those innovations in the same way that other regions are.
Thank you. Andrea?
Some comment on different questions. Yes. Innovation, yes, absolutely. But farmer-driven, farmer-oriented innovation. So farmer also involved with scientists to design tool and solution that fits for them and their specific context. Listening to farmer, yes, listening to their also union, to the way that they are bring together, so distill a message that is clear. I think that at the bottom of it is not only talking about subsidies, also talking to have a fair reward for the product that they produce. And that subsidy should not be used as a replacement of a missing income. Because unless we are definitely not recognizing the work, and then we are condemning agriculture to become less of an economic actor and more of other. And why we advocate the thing that if we are looking towards sustainability, should always encompass all the pillars, economically, environmental, and social sustainability.
Thank you. Ino?
Thank you. I'll address some of these questions, but just broadly speaking and thinking through what would help us in coming to some sort of consensus on some of the more difficult issues that have been raised today. If we think about one of the things that we are not that good at on the ag side is transparency. And if you look at the notifications on the ag committee, I cited the WTO committees, and I have to say I was looking online to see just how many notifications there were, and I was a little surprised, but maybe not so surprised given the nature of the subject. Only 24 members have fully notified all their agricultural subsidies. This is a problem. If we want to have a fair conversation about where we need to go, we need to know what everyone is doing, and we need to be able to better coordinate our efforts so that we're not creating distortions that get us by surprise later. And so we talk about market volatility. Well, subsidies also do contribute to some of this too. And so we have to have that conversation here. And I think this is a great place to have that discussion, because I think the WTO has excellent tools for enhancing transparency, and members should be open to having that discussion and fully notifying everything that they're supposed to notify so we can start that difficult conversation today. Thank you.
Diana?
Small comment about open markets, and again in the same line. Open markets do not mean at all that the farmers are at the mercy of the markets. Open market means that you can sell to whoever you want, if they allow you. Being at the mercy of the market, you can consider a lot of other kind of tools so that when there's a serious weather problem or a plague or something, the farmer can survive. But there's two different issues. And as regards Belen's question, I hope I got it right. You were asking about power for middle-income countries, etc. I think I would narrow it to producers, and some countries may be a very big producer of some specific thing that can become important. And I would really go for value chains. Switzerland, the land of chocolate, you don't produce cacao. So the value chain is the one that should have a lot of say in what you're doing. Cotton. Bangladesh does not produce cotton. Sorry, maybe they do, but I don't know. And so we have to consider the whole thing, and it's going to be much better. And then it forces us to be integrated rather than looking at it on a specific product.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure we have solved all the remaining questions in the negotiations, but
The DG left. The DG left. I mean, she was.
I think
had
not
the
in
solutions.
desperation, or maybe to fix it. Yes,
Exactly.
After your advice, but you've certainly raised a lot of points of interest that I think needs to be brought into the conversation. So please join me in thanking this stellar panel and to the questions.